get started. We'll welcome everyone and the vast members of the public to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. First, we'll have the call to order and pledges allegiance to the flag. If you guys will join me, there's the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We move on to the consent calendar, which includes the minutes of our last meeting of September 1st and the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, do you have to have roll call first?
Oh, good point. I was just rushing through.
Point of Ordnung.
Thank you. Let's take attendance, please, with a roll call.
Member List?
Aye.
Member
Here.
Lowry?
Here.
Member Roby?
Here.
Chair Wolf?
Here.
Member Friend?
Here.
Thank you so much for that correction. Now we'll move on to the consent calendar, which includes the agenda and the minutes of our meeting of September 1st.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Affirm consent by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we move to the general public comment section tonight. If anybody would like to address the commission, here's your opportunity. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and state your name and what city you're from. Okay, you all missed your chance. And we'll move on to oral communications for the board. We didn't pull any. So since we didn't pull any consent items, I would assume we would move on to oral communications.
Staff has really only one item, and it has to do with the free pickup day, community pickup day the city puts on 2 times a year. And I can go into a little bit more detail under item 8, yeah.
Thank you.
Just for public information, the flyer, copies of the flyer are in the back of the room if people want to take those as they leave.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the first item on the public hearing section regarding 618 Main Street, a private parking lot. This was a request for the viewing audience here, so they'll know what we're doing. A request by the Howe Family Trust to establish a permanent parking lot within the commercial zone, a conditional use under the requirements of the zoning code, and asking for a variance under the zoning ordinance to city code requirements for parking lot surfacing, landscape, irrigation, and site treatment requirements. But I guess at the request of the owner and staff, it's been recommended that we continue this item by motion.
Correct.
So, just a question for staff through the chair, if I may. So the item is officially open at this point, and a motion can be entertained?
Yes.
So moved, Mr. Chairman, to continue the item to October 20.
Thank you.
Second.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion?
I have one comment. I will be out of town on a prepaid, non-refundable, can't do anything about it vacation, just on the off chance that there may be another board member in the same predicament. We would not want to have such a meeting without a quorum.
Yeah, of course. All the rest of us all the time. So. Yeah. So the wheels will grind on, but thanks for letting us know. Okay, let's just take a roll call vote to be real clear.
Chair Wolf?
Here, aye.
Member Friend?
Aye.
Vice Chair List? Aye. Member Roby?
Aye.
Member Lowry?
Aye.
And now we move on to a workshop session regarding the outdoor sidewalk and street dining areas within the public right-of-way in Placerville. This item tonight is for discussion between commission members, staff, and public, and to provide direction to city staff as appropriate. So I would assume we'll have to start with the discussion of the staff report and the submittals to us here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Yes, this is a workshop. Basically, I'd like to keep this a little bit informal. I learned a little bit from the chicken workshop, so instead of coming at you with a draft ordinance, I decided to take another step back. So prior to doing that, what I did was, or what staff did, was put together, and you should have a copy of this. I placed copies at the dais, and there's copies in the back for the audience. That's sort of the outline of for the workshop. And this outline is sort of free form. It's to allow you or to invoke discussion of the various, what staff considered various components of basically two types of what we would say outdoor dining and parklets. So I start with outdoor sidewalk dining, and then on the back then there's a section on parklets. And so what staff has done, at least to reach this point, is we looked at ordinances from different jurisdictions. We looked at an ordinance from the city and county of San Francisco, city of Davis, city of Covina. And we also looked at one from Traverse City in Michigan. I was really happy with that one because it was a complete package. Not only did it have copies of the ordinance, it had an application in there, it had illustrations and photographs and examples and different things like that. So to talk about a little bit about what I provided the commission, what you have is a brief staff report sort of introducing the item. So to give a little history, it's not included in the staff report, but essentially, as you're probably well aware, we have sidewalk dining currently on Main Street. None of those are under permit. Typically, what would be the minimum requirement would be an encroachment permit, because essentially those businesses are encroaching in a public right-of-way. So what we're attempting to do is make it a little more formal. We do have businesses that regularly have established outdoor seating and or outdoor dining within the public right-of-way. And staff has gotten requests to make it formal, to prepare an application process and have it so that these things can occur legally instead of being sort of under the radar.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry. So, first of all, I just want to say I thought staff did a really good job with the chicken ordinance, and I didn't feel like you were coming at us. But that aside, you opened your remarks saying you kind of wanted something really informal, so I have a question for the group. Do you want us just to ask questions as we go along? Do we want to wait for a whole presentation? How do you want to handle that? Because questions are already kind of popping up for me.
Staff's recommendation would be let staff give our presentation, which hopefully won't run too long.
Sure.
I just want to go over, just give you a little background about it. I'll go over the outdoor dining and parklets workshop summary of the different items, and then we'll open it up to the commission, to the public.
Yeah, and I would think because it's a workshop item, that it would be appropriate to just kind of open it up, and we can go back and forth with the public and whatever, as long as we just kind of keep the, we play nice, but we can just open it up as a hearing and not be worried about public and closing and all that kind of stuff till the proper time.
Can you pull your mic over a little closer?
Oh, sure. How's that? So with public comment that we've been receiving over the past year or so, with the establishment of these outdoor dining areas, then staff actually went to the city council with a notice of intent to amend the zoning code. And so may or may not involve the zoning code. It may be in another section of the city code pertaining to rights of way and sidewalks and that kind of thing. But we went through that process just to make sure that the council was aware. So with that, I'd like to go over the outline that we prepared. So outdoor sidewalk dining, what exactly is that? So we gave just a brief definition. It's basically the use of an adjacent outside area within a public sidewalk by a food and or beverage establishment for the same eating and drinking activities that occur within the establishment. And that's basically what we see that exists on Main Street today. The purpose would be to allow for a limited dining and commercial display to encroach into the public rights-of-way as an ancillary component of the adjacent business. We would be looking at requiring a permit. It would definitely be an encroachment permit, but it may be other, say like a minor use permit, which would be, we would at least, could be ministerial, subject to conditions imposed by staff. Could also elevate to a planning commission review. This could be for larger dining areas or where an applicant wants to deviate from established standards. So again, these bullets are areas where you can focus on. You can start at the top and work your way through. When we envision when an application is received by the city, there would be what we just call an intra-agency review team. So it would be reviewed by the planning division, engineering division, public works, police, etc. And then we would be looking at, as we formulate an ordinance that's going to contain development standards. And so we have another number of bullets under what are development standards. Well, they could be the quality of the facilities and the equipment. Could be the furniture, style, materials, color. For example, vinyl tablecloths are not permitted. We have examples of ordinances, they don't permit vinyl, has to be cloth. The tables can't be plastic. The chairs can't be plastic. They have to be metal, be durable. Access, we'd consider ingress and egress. Shall it meet the Uniform Building Code, the Uniform Fire Code? Most ordinances look at a minimum of 5-foot pathway required on the sidewalk. We could probably go down to 4 feet. The city of Placerville is a little bit more constrained than some of the examples of the various cities that we've been using as examples. Most of those have very much wider commercial sidewalks than the city has. So they have much more room than we have to work with. But there will be a minimum. We have to look at ADA requirements so that people in wheelchairs and such can safely get through. Required fencing. If the business is serving of alcoholic beverages, there is an ABC permit and does require the fencing. But many of the ordinances we looked at, fencing is something that is not required until they reach 4 tables or 8 chairs or more. And then it invokes the requirement that the outdoor dining area be enclosed in a fence. Portable umbrellas. Do we want to allow these? Non-obstructive? Do we want to allow advertising on the umbrellas? Permanent facilities. I put a question mark there. Most, if not all, of the ordinances that staff reviewed, there is no permanent fixing of the fences to the sidewalk. Removal of all facilities are required upon the establishment closure. And then portable heaters. We can have these things go on into the winter months where it's a lot colder, and most jurisdictions that we found do allow them, but they do require fire district review and approval. Then we have operational standards for these things. And what do we mean by that? Proper supervision by the establishment. So we did find some jurisdictions really honed in on that. In other words, they want to make sure that there is somebody 21 at least, or a manager, or somebody of some authority with the establishment to ensure proper management of that outdoor dining area. If there's drinking allowed, you don't want to get young people and they get unruly, so that they have the ability to control the patrons. Areas are to be clean and free of debris and litter. We don't want trash collecting. You want to make sure that there's active management of the area for trash, for all those kinds of things. Hours of operation. So if they have an outdoor dining area, we want to make sure then, or at least we would recommend that the outdoor dining area would close, whether it be commensurate with the same hours as the establishment that it's an extension of, that that the outdoor area stays open a couple of hours after the actual main restaurant is closed. All the jurisdictions we saw, they don't allow that. It would be commensurate with the hours of the principal operation. And then we were looking at, staff was discussing this, and that's outdoor signs. I know we have all these A boards that are up and down Main Street. Well, maybe if somebody has an established outdoor dining area, we would want to be able to allow for a menu board. So we can have menu or A boards. Some jurisdictions had a 6 square foot maximum and 1 sign per business. But that'll probably be an area that we'll want to spend some time on. And then you can have some other things that might be included in that outdoor dining area, such as artwork, pottery, flowers, and plants. And I think we see that today in one of our existing outdoor dining areas. The outdoor dining area should be attractive and compatible with the architecture in the building and incorporate themes, colors, materials consistent with the downtown area. Again, we saw that fairly consistent with some of the ordinances we looked at. And then the outdoor display limited to hours of operation. In other words, everything goes in when the establishment closes. And now we'll talk just a little bit about parklets, and then I'll open it up to the commission to begin the workshop. And what are parklets? What's a parklet? Well, the two attachments to the staff report. One, what I included was the master design program for outdoor dining. And that was something that was provided to me from one of a staff person in our department that used to work for the city of Livermore. So this is actually from Livermore. It's 9 pages. It talks all about a lot of different features of outdoor dining. And then the second attachment is something that was provided to us at the council meeting from a member of the public, and I thought it was very, very good as an introduction to what a parklet is. So we provided copies for the commission. It's from the Atlantic City Lab, and it's why some parklets work better than others. And so it's a little primer on parklets. It's got a picture of what that is, and typically I look at that as a temporary extension of the sidewalk. And so, and I've seen these. They're in Sacramento. I've seen them in City of Davis. I've seen them in other places that I've been, and they're becoming more and more popular, and typically they're made of wood with an enclosure and railings and such. But either they could be, sponsored by the city, or they could be sponsored by, again, an adjoining business that wants to extend their sidewalk dining area, and they would be consuming or occupying 1 or 2 parking stalls. And so the purpose of that would be to provide an economical solution to the desire and need for a wider sidewalks, and are intended to provide some space for the general public to sit and enjoy, and or provide for an extension of an adjoining eating and drinking establishment. As I mentioned earlier, unfortunately the city of Placerville is very constrained with narrow sidewalks for most of the length of Main Street. Some businesses are more fortunate. They get a fatty in front of them where they could, establish an on the sidewalk dining place. But for maybe those that don't and want to do that, I think the parklet may be a good avenue for them if that's something that the city sees it wants to entertain. We would again require an encroachment permit. May also require a use permit or some other kinds of discretionary application, basically where we have an easy ability to terminate the permit for noncompliance. We would again have an interagency review team, which typically would involve engineering, planning, public works, the police department, etc. One of the things I noticed in some of the other jurisdictions, they have a notice of application for a parklet, posting the notice on the site. So that's kind of interesting. So I put that on here as a bullet because I thought, yeah, I could see that, because if parking is a limited commodity here in the city, and it'll be controversial, and maybe this is something where we would want to go a little extra to notice the area that one of these is being considered. Criteria for consideration of a parklet. We'd be looking at design, enhancement of the streetscape. These things should beautify and not be detraction to our streetscape. Location would be very important for considering these parklets. One, that the location would be an area that would be well used and active. We don't want it in a place, of course, where it's not being used. Two, that it's suitable, that it doesn't conflict with infrastructure, manholes and that kind of thing, where Public Works would want to get in there and do repairs. It has to really be able to fit and be compatible with that particular location. Not all locations are created equal. Community support, and so I think that is an important component, because it's a more, let's just say, severe, if you will, encroachment into the public right of way. So we want to make sure that people support these kinds of things when an application comes through. Capacity of the sponsor to maintain the parklet, and so that was interesting. I saw that in some of the applications at other jurisdictions. For example, if it's a sponsor that just wants to create a public space to be used as a park, it's not a restaurant. You can see a restaurant's going to really actively manage that parklet, where if it's for a park public space, then we want to make sure that that entity has the ability then to appropriately manage it. Compatibility with future city streetscape projects. As you're all aware, the city is engaged in its Main Street rehabilitation project, and we're doing improvements to the mid-block crosswalks, two-corner crosswalks, bulb outs, all those kinds of things. And so if we're going to look at allowing some kind of a use then that would be out there, we want to make sure that it would be compatible with any future plans that the city have. And that's one of the more current ongoing project that we're working on. And then, of course, compliance with ADA accessibility requirements. And then last, we'd be looking at fees. And what I've noticed, most jurisdictions would have an application fee. Most jurisdictions, and this is both for the outdoor dining on a sidewalk kind of situation and in the parklets. There's an annual fee, and the annual fee varies whether or not there's alcohol served. And that's probably to cover the city costs of administration and that kind of thing. But then with respect more specifically to parklets, I saw one of the jurisdictions had a parking stall fee. So in other words, if somebody is going to, on some temporary basis for some length of time, city's going to have to quantify then what the value is of that parking stall that we're losing, and then they're going to pay the city for the use of that parking stall, which we would assume would go into that if it's in the downtown area. I'm sure that fee would then go into our downtown parking district fund. So with that, I just wanted to go through again, we gleaned all of these topics from the outdoor dining and the parklet dining from other jurisdictions in a way to facilitate a dialogue. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you and the commission.
Thank you, as usual, for a thorough, well-done report. Just a question before we launch here on the expected outcome from this. From staff's perspective, are you primarily interested in just hearing and gathering comments and opinions, or are you looking for some sort of action, i.e. motion, including a bunch of stuff at the end of this?
The very, very good question. Yes, basically I'm looking at this to be just the first step, and it was a way of trying to garner comments, concerns from both the commission and the public. And so again, we put together a whole list of different items. We may do another workshop. I was hoping to see a much greater level of participation in this, because I think it's of great interest to the businesses on Main Street. But anyways, that's what I'm looking for. So we're not looking for any motions. I'm going to be taking copious notes from everyone, and hopefully then either we'll come back at a future date with either a more refined workshop format, or we may decide to come forward with maybe a draft ordinance,
Sure.
something that then we can.
So then we all get another shot at this. So we
Yes,
can
I
just
think
tonight's just kind of a free for all. I'll kick it off, I guess, with. I think it's really important for us to remember the difference between the outdoor dining area and the parklets, because it's a mixed bag, but they have some similarities, some similar issues, and then some very different things, and a very different impact on downtown Placerville because of the restricted parking situation to begin with. So I think we need to pay a lot of attention to the parklets in terms of how many where the review process, the application process, because you can just imagine if how our members of the downtown association, oh yeah, we just all voted to give up 10 more spaces for parklets. So I think we have to look at those pretty carefully and have that be not kind of a fly-by-night kind of thing where you can come in and just try it for a month. I think it has to be a pretty rigid process to go through. The other thing I jumped out immediately was the possible effect of losing parking spaces on the effect that might have on existing use permits, where, for some of the restaurants and places where they have a required number of parking spaces that they need to provide / account for, and then we're going to take some of those out of the mix, and at the same time possibly add more tables and chairs that would normally kick in requirements possibly for more parking. So I think we have to figure out how to make those two issues meet. Look, I made them start talking to each other. So, anybody else?
Mr. Chairman,
start-
if I may,
Oops.
City Planner Painter made a very good point, and I do want to point this out, is that though we're focusing on Main Street because that's where we think we would get the majority of the applications, this would be citywide. It's not to say that Broadway couldn't have outdoor dining, though I don't see a situation, at least on Broadway, as your typical, the commercial buildings are set back from the sidewalk with parking, so you probably wouldn't have the kind of opportunity that we're probably discussing here, but possibly on Placerville Drive, there may be some opportunities. But this is citywide.
Sure. But then that would make it even more important to consider the impact on businesses that have use permits, because a lot of times, there's all those overlapping parking requirements and things, and I could just see that really turning into a mess unless it's, we think of it in, try to nightmare all the different situations first in terms of how it would impact use permits. And given the fact that we have some parking lots not downtown that already, where you have competing interests, as staff well knows, where maybe they don't have, because they were older standards, they don't have the landscaping requirements that are, required, in more contemporary times. And it would be nice to get in that landscaping element in some of the vast parking lots that aren't right downtown, but then it affects their parking count. So I would just be thinking about how we deal with that.
Yeah, if I could comment on that, Mr. Chairman. Basically, we're looking at a situation where somebody would be obtaining an encroachment permit to encroach in public right-of-way. And so, for example, when a use permit comes in, typically you're looking at the required parking as on-site parking. This is off-site.
Okay.
This is, public street, so it wouldn't be impacting anybody's conditional use permit or site plan review.
Oh, okay. Do we have any situations just off the top here of where, in order for a business to meet its parking requirements, they have some agreement with the city regarding using public parking?
I know of no such arrangement
okay, good.
exists. So, for example, on Main Street, you have 2 hours of free parking, and that's all you have on Main Street. And then we have the various parking lots, the Fox lot, et cetera, and the parking structure that has the first 2 hours for free, but then you have leased parking in some of the lots in the parking structure where businesses lease parking for their employees. Because I was told a long time ago that if you take all of the people that are employed and work within the businesses, that there is insufficient parking at any given time if all the employees parked on Main Street. Just Main Street, not the parking structure included.
Got it.
As I started to read through this from Livermore, I didn't see, in the beginning it was from Livermore, and I thought, man, they've done a lot of work on this already. I did find a couple things in here that I wanted to make us aware of. On page 3 of 9, which is the section from Livermore, it says planters shall be provided, put in place, planted, maintained, and removed by the city. That's different than what your synopsis said, and I just wanted to make us aware of that. They talk about vinyl tables that are not permitted. Vinyl table cloths are not permitted. I would like us to look at that. If I had an Italian themed restaurant, I probably would want red checked, what they call it, oilcloth tablecloths. I think that's something we need to be aware of. On page 5 of 9, down at the bottom, it talks about tables and chair framework, wrought iron, fabricated steel, cast aluminum, cane or teak. I happen to deal a lot in hardwoods. Right now, teak is selling for $29 a board foot. A substitute for that would be mahogany at $3.29 a board foot. So that really would restrict who would put anything made out of wood out on the street.
So if I may, Commissioner List, what you're suggesting is that we be less restrictive on what kind of wood.
Yeah, there are a number of woods that are suitable for outdoors, and I thought that was a little restrictive to say it all has to be out of teak. So that's my point.
May I, just on that, so maybe, I had the same observation. Finished wood, or finished wood suitable for outdoor use, anything like that would be nice in that case, right? So that we're getting away
Sure.
from something cheap and painted.
At the top of page 7, they talk about umbrellas. A number of the communities that I have been in, especially through British Columbia and Alberta, have these parklets, if you want to call them, and they have umbrellas with advertisements for all kinds of things, Adidas, beer, wine, and so on. I kind of wonder what the thought process was there. It's, you know, it pretty well talks about just plain colors, no advertisements. So that's something I think we need to look at. I think also that it would be nice if they're going to do this, that if the applicant would have to specify the type of lighting they're going to use. Some of these bump outs or parklets look very nice. Like if you've been to over by Stanford, and I'm drawing a blank on the city, but there's
Palo
a number
Alto?
of them that, I'm sorry?
Palo Alto?
Palo Alto, yes, that have the little mini lights, and it really adds a nice ambiance in the evening.
And if I may, Commissioner List, with regards to the umbrellas and advertisements, are you inclined to allow advertisements or not allow advertisements?
I wasn't prepared to go there.
Just for further discussion?
Yeah. At some point, I think we need to discuss that, and I thought we were in a little more general terms at this point, but,
Sure. Yes.
okay.
If I may, on that, the obvious question is, how might it relate to the sign ordinance?
You know what? I just had a thought on that. Had a thought on that too. Is if if we are going to allow some amount of advertising, we wouldn't want it, I don't think, that we would want to allow sort of remote, third-party advertising, because we don't want people purchasing umbrella space.
You're talking about appurtenant signs?
Yeah, appurtenant signs. Very good. Very good, sir. He pulled that one off. So that, that all of a sudden it doesn't become like you're not like auctioning off your advertising space. I think the advertising should be limited to the business, related to the businesses.
Or a
there.
product they carry?
Yeah,
In
yeah,
the,
of
in the
course.
business?
Yeah.
Like a brand of soda?
Yeah, but if you own a business in some other part of the county, you're not going to advertise it on the umbrella, across the street from Cascade.
Soda or craft beer for that matter.
Keeping it generic.
Okay.
On page 8, about midway down, it says, "City maintenance staff shall plant and maintain, including water, the planters provided by the city." I think we need to make sure that's something that we want to take on, or whether that should not be the responsibility of the applicant with standards set for the planters.
If staff may, Mr. Chairman, staff, the city has no, we're not proposing that we would maintain any of the landscaping that the business would be installing. They would be responsible for maintaining the integrity of their landscaping and potted plants.
And then on page 9, it says Chapter 6 of the downtown specific plan. Is this our code or is that their code? I'm assuming now that I understand better that it is their code, right at the top, second line down.
Yes, this entire exhibit was taken from a document from the city of Livermore.
Okay.
It was probably the most comprehensive document I was able to find, and so I thought it would be really good just to provide it to you as a city. And I've been to downtown Livermore, and I've seen these outdoor dining areas and everything, so I've seen how it works down there.
Yeah, I think they give us a lot of great information.
There's a lot of great information here. So this is meant to just facilitate discussion. Are these items appropriate for Placerville? Yeah, that's for us to sort of figure out.
Okay. And then on attachment B, the first page, one of the things that you mentioned in your synopsis was meeting ADA standards. And somewhere I read that Livermore does not allow platforms on their parklets. Or was that platforms on the city sidewalk? If you look at the picture on the front of attachment B of this City Labs, there's actually a step up from the sidewalk to the platform that is, or the parklet in this case. And that would not meet ADA requirements. And if we did it without a platform for the parklets of some sort, then we'd be cutting curbs to put in ramps for ADA. So that whole issue of a platform in the parklet area, I think we need to look at that in detail. That's all I have.
It almost appears from the photo that you're depicting on attachment B, front page there. It looks like this is someone's attempt to try to raise the level of that parklet to approximately the level of the sidewalk. But you're right, there appears to be a visual gap between that, and that could pose a problem with somebody in a chair and or walker, et cetera.
Yeah, I think, as I'm thinking about that, and I don't, I have some experience with curbs and gutters and those kinds of things, but not extensive, but we have an issue with the flow of water down the street. And so that would have to be addressed if you were going to put some kind of a bump out or a parklet there to be able to keep the water to flow down the gutter. I've seen a technique where they lay down a membrane and then they place concrete over the top of that. instead of using wood, which deteriorates pretty fast. So, and then if, you know, business goes out, come in, you can jackhammer and take the concrete out, and it doesn't affect the asphalt underneath. So there are ways to handling that that would make it look more permanent than building a wooden platform out there where the nails pop up all the time. So.
On that same photo of the, I guess it's Philadelphia with the deck, and where there appears to be a difference in elevation, there also, we've got the parklet there, but it also looks like they're expanding that parklet to maybe incorporate also a modified outside dining area as well. So my question is, how would the two of those get along in adjacent spaces, or would one preclude the use of the other? If you look at that, you can see the parklet, you can see that raised area, then you can see the stroller, and it looks like a couple with another infant on the sidewalk, not necessarily on the parklet. Does the parklet encroach, or can it encroach, or does that preclude the use of that outside adjacent dining area? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what also occurred to me is, can a parklet be an outdoor dining area?
Yes, I think that's staff's intent.
Okay. But a
Staff doesn't
parklet could
feel that
also
we're-
just be a park.
That's right. It could just be a park, and that's where I got into the sponsor and that sort of thing. But it was a way of allowing, because again, I wasn't really that familiar with parklets. It was brought to our attention during the comment period when we went with this item before the council to authorize staff to move forward with looking at this. And I guess to answer an earlier question, are these mutually exclusive? I would say probably not. If you have a very, very wide sidewalk, I could see where you could have outside dining on the sidewalk adjacent to the restaurant, and then they have a parklet, you know, in the street where they have additional places. I think staff's thought of this would be that maybe this is an avenue for a restaurant that maybe wants to have some outdoor dining where there's insufficient sidewalk width for an outside dining area on the sidewalk.
So the parklet becomes kind of a multiplier for that business owner in that they could possibly combine outdoor dining and outdoor dining in a parklet. And so now that business has a bigger impact. And then we still have the variety on the street and the lighting and the art and plants and such. And the activity.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Staff didn't think about having both in our situation. Rather, you would have one or the other.
Okay, I have some observations and some questions to share too, if you guys are ready for that.
It's time.
Thank you. So, looking at the article about Philadelphia, I think the time and trouble they took to collect and publish metrics, I think is very wise and very helpful as we look into it. It gives us some sort of swag number that we might postulate for what might be the effect on our downtown. As it happens, I grew up in Covina, and I'm going down south next week, so I'm going to definitely give that a visit. Covina's downtown area, Citrus Avenue, it'll be interesting to find out how they use the space, because downtown Covina has always had angle parking. Whenever, yeah, you know, and every decade or so, the proposal is to change that to parallel parking, and the lawn in front of City Hall fills up with the villagers with their pitchforks and torches. So that's never going to change. One of the things, well, I'm just kind of speculating or being notional about this. It seems to me like, in terms of phases of execution with this, what's in front of us is maybe the first phase of execution would be to get the changes to the sign ordinance and the existing de facto use of A-frames and front of store dining on Main Street, get that normalized, regulated if need be, but put that to bed. And then one thing the next thing that occurs to me is that is there any intent of using the bulb outs in any sort of parklet fashion, or would the placement of parklets be at least influenced by where the bulb outs are? I mean, would it make sense to place parklets in between two bulb outs that are close together? I think we also have some existing data. I don't know that we've measured it in any specific way, but it would be interesting. One of the things that I see is the way the space around the bell tower gets used on Wednesday nights for the organic farmers markets is pretty instructive to me in terms of the number of people it brings out to town and the opportunity for interaction it creates. I'll of course make the heretical suggestion that at some point in the fullness of time there may be some value in adjusting the alignment of Main Street so as to create a free and open space in that wedge of land bounded by Centro Coffee and the newsstand and Pizza Bene and so forth. But that's just me spitballing here. Okay, just an idea. With regard to the uneven heights between a parklet and the adjacent sidewalk, the most obvious thing would be to require that the parklets are flush with the height of the sidewalk. Another option for those of us who worked in warehouses in the younger days, probably familiar with an aluminum plate with a little blade that goes down, which drops in between the back dock of your business and the back of a delivery truck. And it corrects for small differences in heights. And it can have a bit of a hump to it so as to make a gentle approach, make it a diamond plate, and as I say, the blade that goes down in between the dock and the vehicle prevents it from sliding off. It's a pretty simple solution. With regard to the umbrellas, I would only say that if we entertain allowing advertising, we're opening, I think, a can of worms because we instantly move on to First Amendment issues. If somebody who has a dispensary outside the city limits wants to advertise their dispensary, how do we deal with that? And any number of other unappealing offerings that might be proposed. To member List's comments about the material specifications. In my work life, I do a lot of technical specification work, and like I learned in drafting class all these decades ago, you can always over-dimension things. And so I would be happier if we approach this by specifying the characteristics of the material, especially in regard to the way it weathers. So, and I'm out of gas now, so.
Before we keep piling on, it occurred to me that we might as well open this to anybody in the public who wants to jump in. I would suspect some of you do. Yeah, okay, great. for the record, name
For the
and where you
record,
live.
Kirk Smith, City of Placerville.
Thank you,
It's
Kirk.
kind of misleading. I wouldn't suggest to you that you have just one person from the public. Pierre is right. It is a subject of great interest to people on Main Street and to the public as a whole. There's a great number of reasons why that's not the case I could go into, but the time's limited. Let me, by way of full disclosure, suggest that I have more questions than answers. And I do have a particular point of view I want to prevail with you and urge you to focus on doing exactly what was described here on June 4th, when the city presented a wonderful workshop on the subject of historic preservation. It was a great product of the staff, where you had experts come in and make the point that when you have an historic district, property values go up. In addition, the income for the community goes up. And what those experts said that's required to achieve those goals is that you have to have a regulatory structure that, like a Historic Preservation Commission, which the State Office of Historic Preservation said they have a number of illustrations on their website. The city hasn't done that. It's never done it. They've had historic advisory committees on a couple occasions, but they don't have an actual commission that has a regulatory structure set up by ordinance. If you had that, I'm not sure you would be doing what you're doing tonight, that you'd be able to do it. For the sake of full disclosure, I manage property for a living. The family has property, and that includes not as much as folks think, but includes 4 buildings on Main Street. So what you do to Main Street does concern us. We actually have more property on places like Placerville Drive, as do a number of politicians, past and present, who would benefit greatly our property value in terms of size and money if the western interchange in the courthouse goes through. But the bias is the family's always been involved historically in the town and loves it. And so that's the reason for the perspective of keeping Main Street the way it is. Again, the main point made here on June 4th. To illustrate the point, this is a map that comes from the Tolman Building, the City Museum. Every time a visitor comes in, throughout the country or across the nation.
Mr. Chairman, Kurt, I'm sorry. You may need to be by the microphone just so the recording and the audience can hear you. If you can just drop that
Sure.
in front, kind of reach over in
Yeah.
an awkward sort of
Should've brought
fashion.
clips, but you get the idea.
Yeah, sorry.
And it's not accurate because it's only two-dimensional. By this time, you look at it sideways and start looking like a volcano as a dot on top of dots. Sri Lanka, Sierra Leone, you name it, it's on there except for Antarctica and I think it's Greenland. We make money by what's old, not new. So, Mr. Lowry, your point about looking at Pasadena is well taken, and it's appropriate. But what I'd ask you all to do is consider... Pardon?
Covina.
Covina. Consider some of those other places. It's true and important. But also look at Plymouth, Ione, Grass Valley, Nevada City, Jackson, when it's not covered with smoke. All those areas of the gold rush. We have people coming from all over the world, not because of what's new, but because of what's old, the seed of the largest migration in the history of the world. That brings us money. So the more that's done to change the appearance, this hodgepodge architecture on Main Street, the more we diminish that. And that, again, is the point you had on June 4th presented here. When you have just myself here, again, I manage property. Our family grew up as merchants. Merchants work 60 hours a week. And then when they come here on a matter of great importance to them, like the courthouse, they sign a petition and it didn't go very far. It wasn't taken consideration, and they perceive themselves being insulted because they're told, well, if you were informed, it's your fault too. As if, and I'm serious. So that's one of the reasons you're not going to see folks here. And they don't get very far on a number of issues. You had part of the streetscape plan was Cedar Ravine, and look what happened. The public didn't like it and said it in so many ways. After 8 years, you got the message. When you had the measure of the chickens last month, we were told appropriately that it's complaint driven. And I think there was something like 4 complaints since 2009. How many do you have now about not being able to have, you know, sidewalk encroachment, or that you do have it, albeit informally? How many? I don't know. If you take the next step, which is do these kinds of things actually by ordinance, then you come up with something different, because right now, it's not a governmental action. And I tried to count up the number. I think we were told 4. I can only think of 2. One of them that started the controversy, I believe, was Benny's Pizza. And some of us like it. But the fact is that there was some controversy. Some thought it was different strokes for different folks, or it was something that's not available for everyone. So now maybe you want to do it. But the difference is that design was Max Jumbo's back in the 1950s, where there was an indentation. So it's not as much of an encroachment as it would be for other people. But if you start to do those things where you have these ordinances and you establish it, you may come up with secret issues. And again, I know staff can say, oh, well, no, you don't. Well, we heard that before on the courthouse and a few other things. And I'm with a group that on July 10th sued the State Judicial Council to stop the courthouse from being moved. I'm not sure that you would not have a secret problem. I am actually certain you would have had one on the streetscape plan, but for the fact that the notice was been filed in accordance with the law, it was on the county register, the county clerk's registry. Who's ever heard of that? I mean, that has about as much attention as legal notices in the Mountain Democrat. People thought it would be different because when the Board of Supervisors files an exemption, they put it on the agenda, they vote on it and things like that. If it had been known that streetscape plan is so disliked on Main Street, you would have been in court on that. So when you take this action, that's not more than the bulb outs. That's a lot more than adding different configurations of the sidewalks. You would actually be doing different configurations of sidewalks. You'd be making major changes to the historic landscape of the city. And that's why I think you'd encounter secret problems. Again, my question is, where are the complaints? Who's complaining?
So my question to you, Kurt,
Sure.
is what is your position? What's your desired end state? Is your desired end state no parklets, yes on outdoor dining, or no on both?
I should remember to bring my hearing aids, please excuse me. But I did hear the idea, which no on which one?
What's your bottom line? Are you
Bottom
for
line
or
is-
against parklets?
I think you're best doing neither. And the reason is, if you take action, right now, you've not taken action. So if someone has it, how can you file a lawsuit and object to the city saying, oh, well, you're changing a major aspect of the historic landscape? You can't sue. But once you take action, whatever it is, then you've got a problem. And either one, you're altering the historic landscape of the city, which brings us money.
Okay, so the other thing that occurs to me is the statement that you can't sue. I don't believe that it logically follows is then you are being disenfranchised because you can't sue on a particular issue. With regard to how many people are here, what did happen, what did not happen, I would contrast all of that with the Philly collection of metrics, was data collected over time. All I'm hearing right now is anecdotal evidence. I'm sorry, but that's all I'm hearing is anecdotal evidence.
All we have for anything.
Well, then that's not enough to act on, is it?
You're right.
You can't. Whether or not you can act on it, you cannot make global assertions based on anecdotal data, can you?
You are absolutely right, which is why I suggested that you couldn't come up with an ordinance based on anecdotes. And while the staff did good research, they're still anecdotes. They're looking at some various areas.
Right.
So
I think we're in violent agreement that we need to do whatever it is we need to do to make sure that this downtown thrives. And it's absolutely true that visitors tourists from around the state, around the country, and around the world. I mean, there's people from the Gold Coast of Australia on that map you just showed us. To my way of thinking, also, I think it's incumbent upon us, especially in our generational cohort, to be very mindful of what it is we leave in this town that will be attractive to millennials, to use one example. As I think that we need to be mindful of what it is that would make Placerville an attractive place to live and raise a family, given the sets of values that millennials bring to the table. And I think to the extent that we can think about creating third spaces for the millennials, because nobody goes to church anymore. You've read the book Bowling Alone. We need to create these third spaces so that people can see each other and talk to each other informally.
We had millennials in this room on June 4th. They have an interest in history, as they do at the Cosmic Cafe, which has large numbers of them, an old structure. What I think is a better comparison would be Sutter Street in Folsom, and what was done there in the guise of trying to make it more attractive. I did a survey, and I invite you to do the same or have staff do it. I went from one business to another, and generally, you split it down into two categories. Merchants who were on Sutter Street before they made the big changes, and those who were afterwards. There were more than 40 reportedly who left, some of whom came to Main Street, like Grapes and Ivy. Those folks who were there before believe it was ruined because they changed the character with the roundabouts or the bulb outs and changing some of the things that had historically been present. And then those who came afterwards were not enthusiastic one way or another and said, well, there were some pluses and some minuses. You ask residents and you'll find some strong anger for the changes. Again, I invite you to look. It's a shorter trip to go to Folsom. But what also is significant is that the kind of businesses has changed dramatically to where they now have about 21 liquor licenses in just the space of a few blocks on Sutter Street. So if you have that happen on Main Street, it's going to tremendously change the economic climate of Main Street. So,
but you'd have to admit that if we had 30 liquor licenses on Main Street, we would certainly be true to our historical nature.
we would what?
I said, if we ended up with 30 liquor licenses on Main Street again, then that would be Placerville true to its historic nature.
Saloons, you bet, and mud fights and gunslinging and all the rest. You're right. But in Plymouth, I was there recently, and they were lucky because they made some changes to their road, but what they did was put a sealant on top, so they didn't have to go through the major ADA changes. And it's, in my view, a beautiful town, and it does get tourists, including millennials there. But it changed that whole character is intact, where you have these crazy narrow streets. So we don't have any surveys. All we're doing is anecdotal. We don't have any scientific sampling for what people say. And so all we have, one side or another, is anecdotal.
Right, and we also have the opportunities for public participation that satisfy law in the state of California, the Brown Act, to name one. I agree that the places where things are noticed publicly can be less than fully convenient for the average citizen. But we live in an age of the internet. Are there not Facebook groups where these things are being surfaced? Are there not people running weblogs? Does not the Mountain Democrats see it in their interest to make sure that these things get publicized appropriately?
I know all of you have big schedules and lots of things each of you do besides being here. The life of being a merchant is much different. You have stresses of managing payroll and a whole host of regulations that go beyond anything just derived from the city alone. I remember when one matter of great importance to merchants on Main Street was here in this room for the city council, and it was put at the end of the calendar. And some of the merchants couldn't stay. Why? One of them had a child who was home since 4 o'clock. And what does the former mayor say? Well, if it was important to them, we stick around. There's a sense sometimes of futility. There's different ways to get public opinion. And I applaud you for having this venue. It's very sound. Likewise, it's appropriate for the staff to look at it when presumably there were people talking about why did these folks have an encroachment permit and somebody else, unofficial or otherwise, and others don't. So it's very appropriate to raise it. I think you're gonna, but you're be embarking on a major change in the historic landscape of the city, the nature of the city. That's not the kind of thing to be done lightly. And it's certainly appropriate and within your purview, I believe, and respectfully suggest that you urge upon the council to come up with a planning historic preservation commission. You know me well enough to know that if you did it, I'd be back once they do and have complaints. But at least you have a structure. You'd have a system.
So if I can interrupt for a minute, Mr. Smith, it seems like you're first and foremost, your concern is about the process that we're undertaking, that we stop and consider that process rather than just jumping to the product at the other end. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
To me, it makes sense.
Then, okay, and I think I think we get that, and I think it's very valid to think about that, because we all do kind of just jump on the horse and ride sometimes. I might disagree with you a bit on the data that's available in terms of how what we're considering, we've been asked to consider, can really improve a downtown. I mean, it's been 30-some years since I went to architecture school, and in the first 10 minutes on the very first day of an urban design class, we got this lecture, and I remember it really clearly because it was my first day, 2 weeks before I'd been in the military. Now I'm back in college, and it was an urban design class, and they said to have successful urban spaces, you had to have food, water, people, and trees. And those are the four main things, and everything else ends up being kind of subdivisions of those. And so on kind of a global scale, and you go to any successful urban space in the world, and they're going to have those four elements. And if they don't have, if they're missing one of the other three is going to be so overwhelmingly positive that it still works. So on just the largest scale, I mean, I think it could work, but I understand your concern about the process, and we're not rushing pell-mell into this. This is the first. This is the first step.
And
so, other than the process, is there anything else you'd like to share tonight?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I want to suggest that you're very diplomatic, and you should challenge the facts I'm asserting, because we don't have any surveys, and we could do that. You go down just on the phone book, every fifth business or every 10th business, and then you'd have something that's statistically relevant.
Okay, you mean just a survey of local citizens, business owners, whatever?
If we're going to
just a localized survey.
Yes,
okay.
As Mr. Reva says, it does appropriately affect people on Main Street. If you want to know about it, and sure, you're going to be compliant with the Brown Act when you have notice and you bring people in. But if you want to know what people think, that's one way to do it, and it's not terribly expensive. After all, the city spent a great deal of money on streetscape to have a survey in which they came up with 94 responses out of a population of 10,000. What does that mean? That's like a Fox survey that says, should we bomb Iran? I mean, it's not statistically significant, and it's not a representative sample, but you could do that, and I would like to see it done. And I've worked with civic groups trying to find, like, students who would be willing to do that door to door. But again, as long as you have a random sample, every 10th merchant, every 15th, 20th, whatever it is, then you're going to have something that's far more meaningful. When I go and ask people on Sutter Street, I admit, no matter how carefully I ask, whatever I come up with is going to be questioned since I have a point of view. Those are the suggestions I'd have for you. I again commend you for tackling this. I always learn from what you have to say, regardless of whether we agree. Thank you for your thoughts.
All right, thank you.
I'll leave this around for anybody who wants to.
Great,
step on.
Thank you.
So what was just one quick, what was the significance of the dots again on the map?
Every time somebody comes to visit that museum, They put a dot from where they're from.
This is our museum you're talking about. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Smith, thank you for bringing that information. I did want to comment, one thing that I did notice on that, in the, I think it was the Livermore outline here, is that a significant number of outdoor dining facilities, cafe, bistro style dining facilities are very typical in Europe and South America because of the roots there. And what I notice here is that there is a proclivity of people coming from Europe to Placerville. Now, when I travel, I don't travel extensively, but when I do travel, one thing I do like to do is absorb the culture in the area I am in. But there is a certain amount of comfort and familiarity, especially when I'm in a foreign country, that I like to draw on. And I would say that, like I said, with the amount of visitors and tourist business from Europe that we have coming over here, I think to me, it makes sense to provide that maybe a sense of familiarity and comfort to those who are visiting us, and not only let them absorb our culture and our history. And I think the fact that the Philadelphia metrics are there, that's a highly tourist, well, what's the word? Very much visited historical area of our country. We are very similar, certainly not in size, but in aspect. And I think it just makes sense to make that available and to take that into consideration as well. So thank you for bringing that to
I'm glad
our
to swap
attention.
anecdotes with you. Thank you.
I'm going to suggest you exercise the chair's prerogative, since we're not all millennials here, to take a 5-minute break. Okay, we'll reconvene, and I guess we're back to us. If anybody has any final remarks or staff wants to respond, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of comments, and I'll try not to duplicate anything we've already heard. Early on in your opening remarks, Pierre, I think when you were talking about who you had sampled policies from, as staff does in the past, and I can't recall the names of the cities that you mentioned, but certainly they're included in today's discussion. It did occur to me, just as a general, not necessarily germane just to this, but it could go back to chickens or whatever you want to talk about. I recall one of the planning guidelines or some other document from, I think, SACOG, where we're lumped in with, say, Roseville and Sacramento. I can't remember specifically, but that kind of struck me. And I remember then being struck by, well, gee, we're not really similar to Sacramento or Roseville. I think we're significantly distinct, just as our, a lot of the vegetation at our elevation and area is distinct from what you have down in the valley, for example. And I'm just wondering if why staff didn't select, and then one of the speakers, or the speaker, had mentioned Nevada City and Jackson and Plymouth and Auburn, and I do think, particularly with something related to this, that there is some value in looking at other communities along the historic Highway 49 corridor. And then I think the point was made, and I do tend to agree with it in contrasting, say, Placerville with Livermore, for example, or even Pasadena or Covina, that leveraging some of our core assets, which I do think in many respects is our location, our proximity to the discovery of gold and the whole history that Placerville has, and I think that we should always be cognizant of the impacts of anything we do, whether it's this or chickens or what have you, how it relates to that, and making sure that we're maximizing that value, that we're leveraging what we already have. I have just some general comments I want to just kind of pop around. I think you've already answered my question, but this concept is distinctly different from those properties that have an incorporated patio. For example, the European Cafe and the bagel shop next door, they have a patio that's actually incorporated as part of their structure. We're not talking about those entities. That's different, right? 'Cause that's not an encroachment.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's not an encroachment.
Yeah, I kind of figured that as we went down the thing. We already covered the finished wood. I thought Commissioner Lowry was kind of suggesting that maybe we do a bifurcation of the encroachment component versus the parklet. And if he was, I really do support that. If he wasn't, then I would offer that. And then I would further subdivide the encroachment down to encroachment versus what, for example, I think the Pizza Benet has. And I think somebody mentioned that what they're doing there was as a result of the inherent architecture of that spot. That they took, and I think the other place right across the street, the It's Personal Wine, is kind of doing the same thing, where you have kind of a cove or indentation or something that already lends itself to a modicum of the outdoor dining. I want to go on record that I am pro-chicken and pro-outdoor dining. Because I really do think that outdoors is really where it's at, although I wouldn't necessarily add the two at the same time. So I really think we ought to decide what it is that we need to deal with first, and what's the driving force for this, what the impetus for this is. I do think the comment about, is the community driving this, or does the city think this is something that's good to do, and how does the community feel about it? I think there's some value into doing some sort of an assessment with that. Just a general question for staff. Does what Pizza Benet is doing, for example, does that need to be regulated? Does that need to be controlled or overseen? And I'm not speaking against it. I'm just wondering. And if so, why, in staff's opinion, why that is?
Yeah, Pizza Benet has that. First of all, it's a permanent you know, it is affixed to the sidewalk. It's not removable. But to more directly answer your question, it is an encroachment in the public right-of-way.
Okay. Because, you know, I know I go by there a lot, but I can't recall. It sticks out from the building?
Yes,
it does
it's
it does actually-
beyond, it's
it does
beyond
actually the
his
face.
own, or their
Oh.
property within that alcove.
Okay,
It
then I
ex-
answer that as- yeah.
extends into the public right-of-way.
fair
Sort
enough.
of
So it
pile
is-
on, it's a non-conforming use
Okay.
of that
Okay.
public right-of-way.
All right. So I and I think there's, okay, so I could certainly support us dealing with that, and I also encouraging it. On balance, I'm really wary, extremely wary of anything, and I guess this is speaking of the parklet, I'm really wary of anything that's going to impact the parking component, particularly in addition to the proposed bulb outs as part of the streetscape makeover. I think that's going to require a whole different discussion, and that's why I do highly recommend bifurcation, because I think they're strongly dissimilar. The other way to approach this, though, if we want to encourage situations such as what Benet has, the other way to do it, of course, is for building owners, for landlords to believe it's in their interest to support their businesses or their tenants' businesses, and for them to remodel, such that they could create those similar kinds of spaces that Benet has and its personal wine has, and nothing would preclude them from doing that, as far as I know, unless there are some restrictions because of the district that they're in. But they certainly could do that remodel and not then set the city, I'm just kind of speaking rhetorically here, not set the city up for having to sponsor or be responsible for anything beyond the permitting and kind of the general guidelines that you've offered. So I think that's another way to do it. I like A-frames, by the way. I don't see them as being a problem. The other thing we have to keep in mind, there's a law of unintended consequences. What we're proposing is much more compatible with certain businesses than others. What we're proposing really doesn't do much for Sanitex, or doesn't do much for Robinson's Pharmacy, or do much for Placerville Hardware, by and large. It really supports the businesses that are food and beverage oriented. That's fine. But do we want to create that kind of a monoculture on Main Street where that ultimately we start pushing out these other merchants and we start pushing customers to Walmart and other places? And I think we have to kind of give that consideration to these things, that maybe we get a result that we really weren't necessarily anticipating. Certainly, it's up to the individual business what they want to do and who wants to go in there, and I encourage that. But I think we have to kind of be careful. And I was thinking about that when George was talking about the farmers market. Absolutely true. The farmers market's a wonderful place. We don't have a town square. That's actually, to me, I think if the courthouse were gone and we had a town square where people could congregate and we had an announcement board there, what a great space that would be. And it would be really terrific to see a public square. I like the parklet concept for Placerville Drive, and I like the parklet concept for Broadway, and I think we could get some bold vision as we work towards revitalizing those areas and incorporating these features that then bring folks there and turn those into, that type of a culture. I think there's a lot of value, a lot of potential to do that. I have a lot more concern, I think, with the Main Street, but we just kind of have to see where it all goes. I think that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Oh, one last thing. I'm sorry. Any concern about creating attractive nuisances and loitering spots, for, what was the article? People of unusual character. In this case, it was nudists, but, I'm going to say vagrants. I always object to the term booze. And I did find the article is a little bit biased because An argument we made very qualitatively before, we can now make quantitatively. Are those 2 parking spaces better used by 150 unique users or by 2 cars? I thought that really diminished the overall value of the article personally. That's all I have. Thank you.
I just want to real quickly go on record. My proposal is that we get our arms around and normalize through city council action, whatever it takes, to get, if A-frames are legal, let's say so. If affixing permanent things onto the city sidewalk is not, let's make that clear. And then move on to how, what's a reasonable number of tables and chairs in front of a food establishment. Get all of that put to bed before we even try to decide what we're going to do about parklets.
And A-frames are illegal technically right now against the sign ordinance.
Just one quick comment on Mr. Smith, to Mr. Smith. I travel throughout the western United States quite a bit, and anytime we can, we like to sit outside to enjoy the architecture of the community versus what some housewife did with the inside of her husband's restaurant. And so I would be in favor of having outdoor dining on Main Street on a few occasions. And I think as we look at this, maybe a way to approach it would be to have a limited number that we could offer. We're only gonna be able to do 3 of these down Main Street and see how they go. And if it works, then expand it to offer to other restaurants or establishments. And I ate breakfast down in Folsom not long ago, sat out front of a restaurant there on 3rd Street and really enjoyed myself. So.
Just a few quick comments. The first and the last thing that caught my attention in this report, the first thing was in the Livermore report, into the first paragraph, it says, number of parking spaces converted to outdoor dining use shall be limited to 25% of all spaces on certain streets in Livermore. And the first thing that came to my mind was parking. And to me, that's one of the primary issues. It seems like it's been an issue. It's an ongoing issue. So just logistically, that popped out. And then also the comment about are those 2 parking spaces better used by 150 unique users or by 2 cars? Well, heaven forbid we have 2 cars parked in the same spot all day long, from 8 in the morning till 8 at night. But, not to be, without the levity, sure, we need to maintain the flow in our community and our business downtown. We need to make it convenient or more convenient for tourists or whomever to be present in the downtown, and that, to me, that's always been a parking issue. Couple other real quick things, and again, I apologize for being redundant if I am. One of the page 3 of the Livermore says fencing and furnishing shall not be affixed to the sidewalk, and then no decking or stages are permitted. That I think may be a point of contention. So we would need to look at what areas or what properties that may or may not be logical or practical or safe. To me, that kind of stood out. Obviously, because of the situation or situations we have now with permanent structures or installed structures, we'd need to address that. The other thing, and we kind of addressed it, but not quite as in depth, is the umbrella, the advertising. I know we went over that a little bit, but somebody mentioned the Italian restaurant and the red checked tablecloths. And the other thing that came to my mind was the umbrella with the big Cinzano logo on it. It adds very much to the atmosphere. It's almost a generic advertising that you might see on an umbrella or a bicycling shirt or almost anything. and it is part of the culture that that particular restaurant may be trying to present. So again, probably the common sense approach to the advertising. Also, it says no fluorescent colors, no flowers, no stripes. I thought that was a little generic. If there is an establishment who has a theme that might match, I would think if we're going to allow them to extend their business into the outdoors, then that might be something to also look at. So just a couple of things that I just wanted to bring up and give my opinion on. Thank you.
Okay, so these guys keep pulling the rope starter on my brain, so these ideas come up. Yeah, so, as De Beers and Apple know, a certain amount of scarcity is not necessarily a bad thing in attracting customers. And so one of the things we might consider doing with these parklets, if there were a city-owned amenity and there was a relatively small number of them, say 3, okay, the various businesses downtown, and we could give this completely over to the PDA to manage, could, when they wanted to, schedule to have a parklet parked in front of their business for them to do some special thing, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's an antique store that has too many KitchenAid mixers, say. And this could be an amenity that the city can provide to the merchants to expand their floor space for a day, do some sort of, marketing thing. Okay, I'm done.
All right, and then I think it's probably time to move on. Just one final thought for me is that I think the bar for where this changes for approvals of outdoor dining or parklets, that we make the ministerial approval bar very clear and very high before we have to go into, it has to come to the planning commission and quasi-use permit kind of thing. I know that has an impact on your staff and budget and time constraints, but I think we should keep this as simple as possible by allowing just placing the trust for most of this with the staff, and then clearly define, at the comfort level for staff and council where it has to switch into this more broader public review process. Because the last thing all the businesses owners want is another layer. What they will see is another layer of regulation and permits and that sort of thing. So I think we should keep the fee low as practicable, and keep the crossover from ministerial approval to public approval pretty high. That's just my thought.
And it just occurred to me that communicating the message, just like with the chicken coops, not all properties are suitable for this type of activity. And I think that at some point, we got to take that position, and people have to know it.
Okay, would staff have any final comments before we move on, or should we just move on?
The staff would just like to thank the commission and the public for participating in this workshop. We got a lot of feedback, and so we'll go back to our offices and analyze what you've said. One of the comments I think was a real good one. I'll talk about. We did mention a number of the cities where we looked at their ordinances, and I think looking at what Grass Valley has, Plymouth, Nevada City makes a lot of sense. Ione. We'll look at those. They're more local. They're along the Highway 49, the gold chain. So we will do that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to thank the members of the public, Mr. Smith, for participating tonight, and urge the viewing public out there to keep your nose in the wind here in terms of when we're going to do this again and come participate. Sometimes democracy grinds along, but it is democracy, and that's pretty nice thing. Now we'll move on to matters from commissioners and staff. I have a commissioner matter. It turned out I got a little feedback from our last meeting about the chickens, and I ran afoul of a couple of people that, as is their right, took exception to what seemed like an inappropriately levity marred meeting, and to anybody that I would defend strenuously the notion that we can do serious business without taking ourselves too seriously, and I would disagree with some of the folks that thought that maybe we went too far in terms of the humor. But to those folks, I would personally apologize, and just will take that as a lesson learned. But I think we did the public business as we needed to, and we'll just kind of keep an eye on the levity. It's still going to be here. It has to be, because this gets too serious then. So I just wanted to kind of make that a little less muddy. I almost said fouled, but anyway. So to anybody that was offended by the levity, I apologize. Anybody else from commissioners? Yeah. Any items from staff?
Yeah, both Director Rivas and I have separate items. This is a follow-up to my brief overview earlier on in the agenda regarding the city's annual cleanup day. The city partners with El Dorado Disposal and the Snowline Hospice. They do this twice a year in the spring and in the fall. And the one that's upcoming will be on Saturday, October 17th, between 8 a.m. to 1:30 at the Placerville station, the park and ride there on Mosquito Road. There are flyers in the back. We do have them at our front counter, and I believe this notice is posted on the city's Facebook page. If it isn't, we'll make sure it is by tomorrow, and other locations. They're typically these types of cleanup days. They do accept some items, but some items are not allowed. Specifically, they are not accepting tires, paint, mattresses, oils, lubricants, household hazardous waste, fluorescent lights, car batteries, etc. But yard waste, general recycling, metal objects, and appliances, they will be accepted at the, once again, the Placerville Station Park and Ride, Saturday, October 17th, between 8 a.m. and 1:30. And I'll turn it over to Director Rivas.
Thank you, Andrew. Two things, Mr. Chairman. This Friday, September the 18th, we have a Placerville Economic Advisory Committee meeting, and that's at 12 noon. And I just want to bring that up because we're going to have a representative from El Dorado County. It's Mr. Jeff McLaughlin. He is the county's Economic Development and Business Relations Manager, and he is on the agenda. He's going to speak to two different items. He's going to talk about the Placerville Airport and how that could be a real economic engine for activity. And he's also going to talk about broadband service in El Dorado County and also what's available here in Placerville. So I encourage any of you that are interested in those topics to attend. And then the other item,
Excuse me, what was the time again on that one and location?
12 noon, here in Town Hall, this
Thank you.
coming Friday. And then the other item, the city's going to be having what's called a neighborhood chat. We've had those before. This one is scheduled for September the 29th, and I believe that's going to start at 6:30. Though I have 6 here, I think it's actually at 6:30. But anyways, this particular neighborhood chat is going to focus on the issue of funding, appropriate funding for maintenance of our water, sewer, and roads. And so that's a big concern with everyone, and so I encourage you to attend that neighborhood chat. It'll be here in Town Hall, again, September the 29th, and I believe that's going to be it's either at 6 or 6:30, but I think it's at 6:30 to allow people to, have some dinner before coming and engaging in that. And that's all I've got. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, anything else from,
Can you bring us up to date on the repaving of Main Street?
Yes, the county did award the contract. That's the Phase 2 of the Main Street Rehabilitation Project. That is the repaving, the bulb outs, the mid-block crosswalks. George Reed is the contractor that was selected, and construction hopefully will start sometime this coming spring.
I just want to encourage everyone to come out for Oktoberfest on Saturday, the 19th, downtown. Main Street will be closed, and it's a grand time, one of the biggest events I think the Downtown Association does.
that's September or October?
It always starts in September, always starts the autumnal equinox. That will be this Saturday.
Okay, thank you. I think we can probably safely assume we have a consensus to adjourn. Thank you, gentlemen.